Hello and welcome to Mountain Fresh Water Systems video on how to change filters. Now this explanation is going to be applicable to our Pinnacle systems and all the systems that we carry. Also, the generic name for these systems would be called Ultima reverse osmosis systems. So this is usually going to be pretty universal when it comes to those types of systems, although you may see some upgraded things here on this unit, such as the brass fittings and the high efficiency membranes. That won't affect our filter change too much. So when you've called us up here at Mountain Fresh Water Systems and we send you a set of filters, you'll receive at least 4 filters. The first set of filters you're going to get are going to be 2 carbon filters going here. And when you replace these filters, you're going to put them in this order. Basically, when you take these filters out, you're going to replace them with the like filter that you're taking out. And then the first filter that actually comes through is going to be your sediment filter. So you have a sediment filter, a carbon filter, and a carbon filter here at the bottom. Okay. Now, if you happen to have one of our high pH systems that adds some calcium and magnesium back in, that third housing isn't going to be a carbon filter. It will be what's called the Coresex filter or calcite filter. This filter has a little bit of heft to it. You'll definitely know if you have the right one. You're going to put it in this third housing. Now, the fourth filter that you will receive is going to be a post filter. There's a couple different post filter options that we have, but they're usually going to be this shape and this size. Now, this filter is going to replace the filter here at the very top, and we will explain that here in a moment. Okay, so the other parts that we're going to need are going to be the wrench for removing these housings here at the bottom, pliers or another wrench of some sort to remove a brass fitting here at the top, Teflon to add back to these threaded fittings going at this filter at the top. So really, there's just a lot of work going on up here. And last but not least, you're going to need a pressure gauge for the storage tank. Now, to add the pressure, you'll need a bicycle pump or a compressor, anything that would fit on a Schrader valve. Okay, so the first couple of steps that we're going to take when we're actually changing the filters is going to be finding this yellow line. Not all systems will be that way, but our systems are all color coordinated in that sense. You're going to find the line that comes into the filter that says sediment, or the first filter of the 3 at the bottom. That will then have a shutoff valve on there. The on position is when is in line with the tubing, and when you need to turn it off, which is this is going to be your first step, is going to be turning that at a 90-degree angle. Now, if there's not a shutoff on this tube, just go ahead and follow that up to the wall where there's an angle stop or a shutoff valve on the wall itself. Go ahead and turn that, push that, pull that, however you need to turn that water off. That's going to be your first step. Now that we don't have high pressure coming through the system anymore, we need to turn any of the water that is sitting in the storage tank off. Now, there's going to be a couple variants of this shutoff valve. In this case, is going to be a 90-degree turn. And then there's also some that are going to have a vertical shutoff that still usually turn in 90 degrees to turn off. Now, that's going to be the second step. First step is turning off the feed line. Second step is turning off the storage tank. Now, the third step we're going to go to is turning on this faucet, the reverse osmosis faucet. If you have it only hooked up to your refrigerator, you can turn that on as well. And only a little bit of water is going to come out, and that's going to release the pressure throughout the unit itself. Now, we're going to leave that on during this process. There's no reason to turn it off. We're just going to make sure that stays on. Now, on this system, we're going to have on the post filter, the top filter here, we're going to have a couple connections. You're going to have a red line, which is going to be connected to your storage tank. And then you have your blue line, which is now connected to your faucet. Okay? So what you're going to do is, first of all, lay down a towel right out from under your sink or wherever you're going to work on it. That just gives you a little bit of room to work without making a mess. Lay down your towel. You typically have enough tubing to pull the system out and set it out onto the floor, onto that towel. Then, after you've got it nice and out and secured, you're going to take that brass nut or nylon fitting, depending on what you have connected on this unit, go to the blue line or the line going to the faucet, and you're going to loosen that nut. Then go ahead and continue to take that off, and then when you're ready to pull it out, point it down towards your towel, because any of the water going up to the faucet in that line will come out when you do that. So go ahead and let the water drip out of the towel, and then now you have no connection here, and we're going to keep this red line connected. We're not going to disconnect that. What we're going to do is we're going to take that whole post filter off. And because this is a T, you're going to grab here and you're going to rotate all of this off, the filter as a whole. Okay. Now you're going to have the old post filter here, and you're just going to take this brass nut off, or nylon, depending on what you're looking at. And we're going to prep these fittings for the replacement filter. Now, when you put this Teflon tape here onto these brass fittings, when you look into the actual fitting itself, you're going to go clockwise. You're going to do about 3 to 4 wraps. Okay. Now, one of the important things is to make sure that when you do press this Teflon tape on, make sure it's not covering the hole here. That will create issues in the future. So make sure that it's nice and clear there. And you're going to do the same thing. Now, if you want to take a knife or whatever and clean up this thread a little bit, you can do that too. But for the sake of the video, we're going to let you do that on your own. So, again, clockwise if you're facing into it, 3 or 4 wraps. There we go. Do a nice press so it's nice and clean. And then, this is the old one, but for the sake of the video, we're going to leave this down here. So the new filter, you're going to, on this one here, you have engraved in text here, you're going to have a direction. In this case, it's going to say flow with an arrow going towards this side. Okay? And so you have the thicker end on this end, then it flows towards the smaller end. All right. Now, keep in mind the water is going to be flowing to the faucet itself. So we're going to go ahead and attach it this direction, coming from the storage tank to this first end. Okay. You're going to leave it so there's a couple threads still showing on this side. Reconnect it. Oh, you know what? Actually, we need to add that fitting back on there. So the elbow is going to go back on here as well. And if you need to keep it disconnected when you do that, you can. It depends on what version you want to do with that. All right. And just be careful not to strip the threads because this is brass going into plastic. That's why we're using the Teflon. Okay. Now, the flow towards the faucet, we're set that way. We're going to press this on for now. We're going to keep this blue line disconnected. That way, when we're working with this, that line is not going to be tethering us back under the sink. So we usually leave that disconnected for now. Then you're going to take your spanner wrench here, and this is going to help you take off the bottom housings. So you're going to slide up under here. And if you have the bracket facing you, sometimes the pressure over the year can build up and it gets a little bit tighter. If you really need to turn tight, you can put your shoulder against it. But usually you just put your chest against it, break that seal. And then you can do all 3 at once, depending on if you are okay with a little bit of water getting there. But what you're going to do is you're going to now that you broke that seal, you can do the rest by hand. Just be careful that these don't fall over and make a mess. All right. Then you're going to, into your sink usually, but in this case we're going to use a bucket. We're going to take the old filter out, okay, set it here, and then take the rest of the water and pour that out too. So for the sake of the video, I'm going to put this filter back in there, but you're going to unwrap that filter over there and put this here. Okay. Now, you're going to repeat that twice more with these other housings, but I am actually going to show you one of those two. They're all going to be pretty much the same in that way, but there's a couple parts to these carbon filters that you want to pay attention to that just can potentially save you a little bit of a headache in the future. So let's do the second housing. Same structure here. Okay. All right. So perfect. This was a great example of what happens sometimes. So on these filters, these are going to be the carbon filters. On the bottom and the top of the filter, there is a stopper that can disconnect. Okay, it's a little clear O-ring. Sometimes it has a color to it. Sometimes it's black. Now, that when you change the filters, you want to make sure that that comes out of the bottom as well as there's a stopper on the top. Now, if you look here, there is no stopper. So I'm going to put this back in here. Now, if you reach up in here, we'll find that that stopper is still there. If you double up these stoppers or triple up these stoppers, that can easily cause a leak in the future. So pay attention to that because it's a small thing, but it may cause you to have to tighten more or not tighten enough and cause a leak from the trimming here or the rim of the housings. So, and of course, dump out the water, take the new one in, and they all have those stoppers brand new as well. So pay attention to that. That is something that can be an issue if you don't. And then you basically, on these ones, I didn't really mention it before, but when you tighten them back up, you can do them nice and hand tight, a firm hand tight. Okay. If you don't feel confident in your hand strength, if you use the wrench, it's not recommended. It's written all over it. Don't use it. But if you have to, just do a very, very gentle turn just to finish that seal. If you continue to do that every year and tighten it too much, that'll end up compressing the O-rings in these housings that can end up leading to a leak. There you go. Now that we've changed the bottom three and we changed the top filter, now we're going to get ready to put it back under the sink. We're going to take that blue line that was connected to the bottom of the faucet here. We're going to grab that blue line. We're going to reconnect it. Take the nut or whatever nylon fitting is on there. You actually crimp it on there nice and tight, and then tighten that back. Okay. Now we have all of our connections made again. And what you can do now is we can turn the water on. You can leave it out just to make sure it's not leaking. Check for any of those. Go ahead and take it out. Keep it out from under the sink. Turn on the feed line. Now that water is going to come through, rushing through these filters here. It's going to be pushing any sediment, carbon, anything through there. And then it's also going to be pushing air out of those filters now too, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the air out of the filter housings, then it's going to come up to the membrane, and then you have your filter up top. Okay. Now what we're going to do is turn this water on. The 2 gallons of water that's been stored in this tank, we're going to go ahead and turn that valve back on, meaning we're going to go from that 90-degree angle, that was turned off, to on. Now when you turn that on, be prepared, because this top filter, which now the water is going to be flowing through, is full of a black carbon sediment. Okay, so when you turn on this, that water will be rushing through here and flushing out that new sediment. So wherever the faucet is flushing out to, probably your sink, make sure there's not dishes or anything that if that black water splashes into it, it won't make a mess. It only takes one time to figure that out. Okay, so you turn that on, the water splashes everywhere, it's because you didn't prepare. So make sure you clean that out, and then quickly after that, if you have a white sink or whatnot, go ahead and make sure you flush that down. That way it doesn't make any weird staining or anything like that. So as you're letting that water, as you turn this on, and then you open up the faucet, which is probably still open at this point, that water will flush out with a black carbon sediment, and then it'll continue to run, letting these 2 gallons of water flush all the way out. Now, again, that water is only flushing through here. When we turned this on, the water started pushing through these housings. That is now going to flush these housings. It takes a little bit of time for that to happen. So after this is flushed here, the water can continue to run. So as this is flowing and after it runs out to a small trickle, that lets you know that's the production speed now getting to the faucet. So it's going to run out full speed when you turn this on, and then when it dies out to a trickle, that is going to be the production speed of the reverse osmosis system itself. Now that we know that the tank is empty, we're going to go ahead and pressurize the tank. We're going to take this low pressure gauge here, and on the tank, you may have to rotate it around depending on the position of your system and your position of your tank. But sometimes the tanks are laying on their sides, just depends on the install. But you're going to rotate it around, find that Schrader valve here, open this up. You're going to take that low pressure gauge. Now it's a low pressure gauge, not a high pressure gauge. The reason why we say that is because when this is completely empty, we want to get it to 10 psi. So you're going to go ahead and check the pressure. In this case, we're only at 4 psi. So we're going to take our bicycle pump, our compressor, or whatever we may have to increase the pressure here. But again, these readings are only accurate if the tank is empty. If you feel like if you can lift the tank after this got to that little trickle, that is telling you if they're still heavy, that means there's probably still water in here. You may have to pump that up a little bit. If you start pumping it up and water starts to speed up out of this faucet, that means that there was not enough pressure to get that out in the first place. So pump it up. Once it dies out to a trickle, again, now you're going to check this and you're going to get to 10 psi, again, when it's empty. After you get to that point, Put the cap back on. Okay. And your tank is all taken care of. Now, what we might check for here is the any leaks on the system. So now you have the pressure here, the water is coming through. Now you've had time to let this pressurize. What you're going to do is you're going to take this and you wipe everything off the best you can with a towel, paper towel, whatever you have, and you're going to tilt it back. When you tilt it back, if you hold it there and you feel on this rim here that there's no water, no seepage here, then you're good to go. If you have found that, make sure you dry it up, wait a couple more minutes, do it again, just to make sure that it wasn't just residual water from when you were changing the filters. Now, there's no leaks here. You check your fittings. If you've got the brass fittings, you definitely don't have anything to worry about. If you've got nylon fittings, which are a little bit like an opaque, white type clear fittings, those are usually pretty good to go too. The fittings that you do want to pay attention to are fittings that are called quick connect fittings. They are kind of like this fitting here. They have a little flange on there. Just pay attention to the rim of all of those. Most of our systems don't have any of those on them. That's just how we prefer them, just because we don't like leaks just as much as you don't like leaks. So we're going to go with brass and nylon majority of the time. So after you scan it over, make sure there's no leaks. You're going to take the filters back in and, of course, place it back into your sink where you are going to be good to go. Now, this is all fine to look at this and kind of look at the parts that we need and all of that, but it really helps if you see a filter change actually going on. We're going to go ahead and jump over to a live filter change. All right, let's get started. So come on this way. When you get down here, of course, laying down a towel is a good idea. Having a towel here because you're going to be opening the unit that has water in it, of course. You're going to want to have a little bit of freedom there. Now, keep in mind, majority of the time when we install these systems, we actually have enough tubage here that actually lets you bring the unit out, which is definitely helpful. So, in this case, we're going to go ahead and remove the unit from under the sink. Okay, it's a little bit tight here. So, we're going to be mainly working from the back of the unit, but just from the front of the unit here. When we're talking about turning off the water, we have, of course, those two spaces that we need to look at. Following the yellow tube is typically going to be the best way to find the shutoff that is feeding the unit. Okay, so follow that yellow tube. In this case, we have a white and blue shutoff connected here. I'm going to turn that off. That'll then turn the water feeding the unit off. And also on the storage tank here, you don't have to pull the storage tank out. This is just for you to see. But on the storage tank, you have a shutoff here. Usually turns about 90 degrees, just as long as it's in the off position. Parallel with the tube is going to be on. Obviously, this is going to be turned off. We're going to do that. Set it back here so that we don't have to work around it. Okay, so now we have both turned off, the feed line and the storage tank. We're going to go ahead and open this faucet, which will release a little bit of the pressure remaining in the unit, so that when we open it, we don't have a little spurt of water coming our way. So, again, usually we're going to disconnect the post filter here, which is the filter at the very top. We're going to do that as such. Open this up, and we don't have to worry about the water shooting everywhere because we turn the water off. But now, after you disconnect this post filter, now we're going to disconnect the blue line, which is going to the faucet, which is also where the flow of the post filter is heading. We're going to disconnect that. Now, there is going to be water in the line up to the faucet, so when you do disconnect that, you're going to point it down to the towel or whatever bucket you may have, and just expect a little bit of water coming that way. So, a little bit of residual water. Okay, now we are good to go. Then we're going to unclip this post filter here and disconnect this. That here. All right. Now this system is fairly new. We actually don't need new filters on this particular unit, but we'll show you how to assemble and disassemble the filters as if it were being replaced. So we're going to take this brass elbow out of the post filter. Okay, and then you would throw this away. Take the new post filter, of course, which looks just like this. Now, on these, we have some Teflon tape residual from when they're last installed. You can take as much of it off as you can. You don't need to kill yourself taking care of this, but definitely just rip off a little bit of it. And then take that Teflon tape that we had. We're doing this now. Of course, you can do this later, right before you put the post filter on. But it just kind of helps that you do it right away. That way you don't forget. It definitely helps with preventing any leaks when you connect all the tubes. So I'm going to add. Now, when you're putting on the Teflon, typically you're going to be looking directly into the hole that you're surrounding with Teflon, and you're going to go clockwise. Usually holding it in this position makes it a little bit easier. If you haven't messed with it before, sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out how to hold your hands to get this done. Do a few here. Go, got it nice and tight. Usually give it a nice tightening, and we're good to go. All right. Now, you can do the same thing on this side. The feed into the post filter. The same thing. Again, kind of, if you were looking into the hole, it's going to go clockwise. All right. Now, we're going to wait to the end to put this back on, because again, if you're connected with this to the actual filters, you're kind of being pulled back under the sink. Wait till the end, and you're able to have a little bit more freedom with the unit as you're working with it. Now, this particular unit is a high pH unit, so it is going to have the sediment filter and a carbon filter, and then the Coresex calcite filter instead of a secondary carbon filter. Of course, you are going to receive the filters that correlate with the specific system that you have. So just replace the filters with the like filter that you're taking out. So now that we have the water, again, the water turned off, we're going to go. Usually I like facing the back side of the bracket because you have the bracket to work with as opposed to grabbing all over this filter here. You're going to have this bracket and you're just going to break the seal. You can either do that or you can drop your shoulder to it and just kind of break that seal. I usually like to just do all three at once. That way you can just get to work one after the other. Okay. Now, there will be some water, obviously, in here as you take these out. Okay. All right. Now this here, this filter is actually going to be the last filter since we're facing the back of it. This is the Coresex filter here. Okay. All right. Water out here. This one on most systems will just be a regular calcium filter. I'm sorry, a regular carbon filter. Okay, but in this case, it's a thick filter full of calcium and magnesium. Okay, and like we said before, make sure you pay attention to the O-rings or whatever is on top, the spacers here. And then as you take the old one out, now you put the new filter in. And you're going to hand tighten it first, and then at the end, decent hand tight. At the end, if you'd like to tighten it up a little bit with the faucet or with the wrench, you can. All right. Now, again, all of them are a little different depending on which you get, but because this is the feed here going into the center one, in this case, most filters is going to be on the furthest left filter. Now, here's your sediment filter. Okay, right now it's still pretty new. This is actually only about 2 months, and it's a little bit, it comes in pure white. 2 months. Yours maybe look dirtier. If this doesn't particularly look dirty, don't feel like you're wasting your money changing the filters. Some areas just don't have a lot of dirt, but they have a lot of chlorine. So don't feel like because this is still coming out kind of cream color as opposed to dirt brown, it's okay to change the filters in that case. So I'm going to put that here. Actually, put out water again. Okay. Now there's going to be at the bottom here, maybe hard to see on camera here, but there's a little nipple at the bottom that we will have at the very bottom there. And obviously you want to fit these here, the ends, the holes on the end here. And then slide it right back under, just like. And again, in this case, we're looking at the carbon filter. Now there's no stopper here on this particular one, but there's a stopper on this end. So you reach back up in there and there it is, voila. So make sure, I mean, you're going to be replacing with a new filter. Those new filters will have those stoppers, but make sure you take these out because you don't want to double up stoppers. Otherwise, there's potential to prevent a good seal around the edge here. Now, one other thing to look at to make sure that you're preventing leaks is on the inside here again, there's actually an O-ring here in the center. You can get a set of O-rings from us here at Mountain Freshwater, or you can last a couple years without having to replace them. But if you see that those are starting to get flattened, then you can order a new set and we can get those for you. So put the back in here. And just a good hand tightening. Now you're usually going to be just fine hand tightening. Some people aren't able to do that quite well. So we were actually going, you can do this, but you're just going to go a little tiny turn. Just kind of seal it up, preventing any leaks. You don't want to tighten it, too tight because you can run the risk of flattening the O-rings or cracking the housings. So there are some options there. Just kind of secure. Okay. And then sometimes you can use, sometimes there's stickers on them that'll kind of tell you where they're at as far as too tight or not tight enough. Okay. So now that we have those all changed and everything is secure, we're going to go ahead and, remember, look here at the filter where it says flow, and the flow arrow is going towards this direction. You have the thick end and the thinner end here on the actual filter. It's always going to be flowing that direction. This here is particularly an Ultima filter, which you are going to likely be receiving from us. So flowing this direction, okay? Now, the elbow that goes to the faucet and the blue line is going to go on the end of the flow because it's flowing to that. You're going to hand tighten that pretty good. You can obviously tighten it with a tool if you need to as well. Then you take this T, again, that comes from the storage tank, and you're going to put it on like so. All right, now you don't want to go too tight. You might want to leave 1 or 2 threads visible. That way you're not putting the metal too far into the brass fittings, too far into the actual filter itself. Now, we also have units that have nylon fittings. Pretty much everything applies except for you can undo the nylon by hand as opposed to using the tool. Now we're going to reconnect the line to the faucet here. Okay. Usually give it a nice hug, tightening here. Okay. And then, of course, we had the water turned off there and here. So now we're going to turn the water feeding the unit back on. Now, if you don't have this shut off, if you follow it all the way to the back, on the walls, there's going to be an angle stop or a shut off for the hot and cold water. Either shut it off on the wall. If you have older plumbing and you don't feel secure doing that, you can turn the water main off out front as well. It works, not as effective, but it definitely works. So you have that feed line turned on. Now you'll start to hear water running through there. It's okay. Just kind of, you're going to check it for leaks here in a minute. And then you're going to turn this water back on. Now, as I mentioned before, when you are turning this faucet back on, you're going to make sure that you don't have a lot of dishes and whatnot in here, because usually when this post filter is brand new, it's going to have a black sediment that it shoots out. And if you have dishes all over, it'll potentially get all over you. So, of course, we have a clean sink here, and then your faucet is already open. In this case, it may be turned off, not a big deal, but we're going to open it and then turn the faucet back on, and then we have our flow. Now, this flow is the water that was in the storage tank, and now it's being pushed through. And as this continues to run, it'll eventually die out to a slight trickle. That trickle is going to be the production speed of the system. And once we get to that trickle, we're able to actually test the pressure of the tank and adjust it, as I'll show you here in a moment. All right, so now that the water is run out, this is what the small stream will look like here. This is the production speed of the unit. That will tell you that the storage tank is empty. Now that the storage tank is empty, we can get a proper reading from the storage tank. And we're going to do that here. Now the storage tank is going to have, I'll pull this out just for visual reasons here. The storage tank is going to have a Schrader valve, just like a bicycle pump. And that's what you're going to use to pump it up. If you have a compressor, you can use that. Bicycle pump will work. But you're going to need a low pressure gauge, a gauge that can show you 10 psi or less. A lot of times pressure gauges are going to be pretty high because you're going to be using it for an actual tire. In this case, you just need to have it down to 10. So in this case, when we did this, we have very little pressure in the unit. So we will go ahead and pump it up. All right, so now we're going to connect the bike pump here and go ahead and add a little bit of pressure. Now, if your system hasn't been maintained in a while, then you may have more water in here than pressure. And as you pump air into this, if your flow out of your faucet starts to increase, that means that you had zero pressure. And that a lot of times can cause, the problems of, having either too much water and not being able to get it out of the storage tank, or that also could be a good reason why maybe a refrigerator that's connected isn't going to be working as far as the ice maker. Okay. So our flow stayed the same, even though we had zero pressure. Our flow stayed the same out of our faucet, which just means we had enough to get all of the water out. Now, all right, testing that again. We're right at 10 psi now. So just a good guess. Like we've done this a couple times. So, all right. We're going to, if you have the cap, put it back on. If you don't, no big deal. Then put the units back. Now, some people don't have enough room for these storage tanks to stand straight up. Sometimes they need to lay it down, slide it under the plumbing, and the storage tanks can lay under there because they are they're pressure regulated, not gravity, so they can lay on their sides if needed. Okay, and then, like I said, go ahead and the last inspection, just to make sure you did a good job, would be to take your towel, double check, say, lean the unit back, make sure that there's no water on the rim here where the connections are made. And if that's the case, also make sure that you're not dripping from the top, that you may have, when you open this up, sometimes it leaves water on the top. So make sure that's nice and clean so that you're not thinking you have a leak later when it's really just residual water. So, okay. Put the unit here. Now, when you are putting it back in, make sure that your black tube, which is the drain line, does not get kinked either. That will cause the unit not to create water and create a service call. So, all right. And that is how you change the filters on most 5-stage units, especially in Arizona. They usually have this similar archetype here. If you have any questions, you can, during, after, before, you're welcome to call us here at Mountain Freshwater at 480-899-8889. And we will be able to answer you. Even after hours, we still usually answer and take care of you guys if you have questions. Thank you so much for joining us here at Mountain Freshwater, and we'll talk to you soon.